Hey, it's James. Before we start, let me tell you something most people don't know. In the Army's most secretive unit, there's a job called a breacher. He's the man who stands in front of the door everyone else is afraid of. Steel doors, barred doors, rigged doors. His whole career is learning how things that look unbreakable actually come apart. Not with rage, with study. A good breacher will tell you the door is never the problem, the hinges are. Today's story is about a man who spent 19 years opening the hardest doors on earth, then came home, hung up his kit, and built a quiet life making doors that don't open. His wife's family thought quiet meant weak. They thought a man who doesn't shout is a man who won't act. So, when 4 grown men put his 17-year-old daughter in surgery and called it discipline, they expected him to yell, or sue, or crawl. He did none of it. He smiled, and within 6 days, every one of them learned what that smile had been holding back. Stay with me till the end, because who was sitting in his passenger seat is the part nobody sees coming. Capano Flats sat on a bend of the Texas Gulf Coast, where the shrimp boats came in low and rust-streaked, and everybody knew everybody's grandfather. Grady Renshaw had not grown up there, and the town never fully let him forget it. He had grown up nowhere in particular. A base in Georgia, a base in Kentucky, wherever the Army moved his father. At 20, he passed a selection course most men fail, and for the next 19 years, he served in a unit whose name never appeared on his paperwork. His specialty was entries. Explosive, mechanical, surgical. Grady was the man who studied a fortress for 6 days and then made its front door irrelevant in 4 seconds. His teammates used to joke that Grady didn't open doors, he ended them. What the job actually taught him was patience. You never touch the door on day 1. You watch it, you learn who built it, what it's hiding, and where it's weakest, and when you finally move, it's already over. At 39, he retired with 2 rebuilt vertebrae and a folder of commendations he was not allowed to show anyone. And he did the last thing anyone expected. He moved to his wife's hometown and opened a little fabrication shop called Renshaw Door and Vault. Storm doors, hurricane shutters, safe rooms for families who lived in the path of the Gulf's worst weather. The man who had spent half his life opening doors now built doors that would not open, and he liked the poetry of that. His daughter Willa liked it too, 17 years old, stubborn as a jammed bolt. She had her father's steady hands and a welding bead so clean the community college instructor photographed it for his classroom wall. She wanted to build boats. In a town like Capano Flats, that should have made her golden. The problem was her mother's family, because in Capano Flats, everything that floated, towed, or posted bail belonged to the Barlows. Grady had married Tamsin Barlow 20 years earlier, back when she was trying to outrun her family, and he was the stranger with calm eyes who didn't know enough to be scared of them. Her father, old Orville Barlow, had built the family's grip on the town, one repossessed boat at a time. When Orville died, everyone assumed the empire would soften. Instead, it passed to his widow, Charlene, and hardened like dropped concrete. Charlene Barlow was 71 years old, wore church clothes 7 days a week, and ran her 4 sons the way a handler runs dogs, with a tone of voice. Knox, the eldest, owned the tow yard and the county impound contract, which meant every car accident in 3 counties paid him twice. Rance ran Barlow bail bonds, which meant half the town owed him their worst night. Jeb ran what was left of the shrimp fleet, 6 tired trawlers that somehow earned more insured than they ever earned fishing. And Deacon, the youngest, ran a boxing gym that trained nobody and settled everything. 4 businesses, 1 family, and underneath them, a truth the whole town knew and never said. The Barlows didn't obey the law in Capano Flats. They leased it. 9 years back, one of the boats mortgaged to them, a trawler called the Miss O'Deal, had burned to the waterline at the fuel dock at 3 o'clock in the morning. Her captain, a stubborn Cajun named Emile Fontenot, who owed the Barlows more than the hull was worth, was never found. Drowned, the county ruled, ran off, the family said, and smiled when they said it. The insurance paid out to the lien holder, the Barlows, and the town filed the whole thing where it filed everything about that family, away. The trouble began, as trouble does, with a kid doing her job too well. Willa spent her summer doing hull welds at the Barlow boatyard because Tamsin thought it would knit the 2 families together and because the Barlows liked the free skill. In June, patching a bracket in the lazarette of Jeb's oldest trawler, the Corinda B, Willa found something that didn't belong. A fuel line rerouted where no fuel line should run, a cheap timer relay zip-tied into the bilge wiring, and fresh insurance paperwork rolled in a waterproof tube like a diploma. She was 17, not stupid. She'd grown up on her father's rule, document first, decide later. So, she photographed everything with her phone, put the panel back, and said nothing. For a week, she carried it around like a hot coal. Then she mailed prints to the county fire marshal with no name on the envelope. What Willa couldn't know was that the fire marshal's office clerk moonlighted for Rance Barlow, pulling records for his bail business. Within days, the envelope was on Charlene's kitchen table. There were only so many people who'd been inside that lazarette. The boatyard log said one name. On the last Friday of June, with Grady 4 hours away installing a vault door in Houston, Deacon Barlow drove out to the Renshaw shop where Willa was working alone, and his 3 brothers followed in Knox's wrecker. They wanted the phone, and they wanted the lesson to stick. The call reached Grady at 9:40 that night from a nurse at Bayview Regional named Cameron Doss, whose mother's storm room Grady had built for free after the last hurricane. Her voice was low and fast, the voice of someone spending a favor. "Your daughter's here. Your wife's 4 brothers did this. She told me before they sedated her, and the story they gave the desk doesn't match her hands. She's in surgery now." The drive back took Grady 3 hours and 11 minutes, and he would never remember 1 mile of it. A surgeon named Dr. Annalise Kroll met him with the x-rays. Willa's right hand, her welding hand, had been crushed in a bench vise, 4 metacarpals in pieces. Her left orbital bone was fractured where an elbow had come down like a hammer. She fell from scaffolding, the report said. "Scaffolding doesn't leave vise serrations," Dr. Kroll said, flat and careful. "And I photograph everything." In the hallway outside recovery, Grady found Charlene Barlow waiting with her purse on her knees, and what she had brought him was a smirk. "Boys discipline," she said. "The girl put her nose in family business, and family handled it. You're not going to make a fuss now, are you, soldier? What'll you do, call the army?" Grady looked at the woman for a long, quiet moment. Then he said absolutely nothing. He smiled at her the way you'd smile at a door you'd finished studying, and he walked past her into his daughter's room. It was the last calm night the Barlow family would ever spend in Capano Flats. A breacher's first rule: never touch the door on day 1. That night Grady sat by Willa's bed with a legal pad and did what he had done for 19 years before anyone got loud. He made a target folder: 4 brothers, 4 buildings, 4 schedules, 4 debts, 4 crimes, because men like that always have crimes, the way damp houses have mold. You don't have to plant anything, you just have to find the rot and put a light on it. Knox's impound lot ran a VIN-swapping racket through the back fence. Rance's bail ledgers had a judge's name in them where no judge's name should be. Deacon's Jim washed all of it. And Jeb had the Corinda B rigged to burn, exactly like a boat 9 years before. That was the thread Grady pulled hardest, because arson men repeat themselves. The Miss O'Deal file was thin, but the money wasn't. An old settlement account had been quietly bleeding $800 a month for 9 years to a post office box in Dulac, Louisiana. Dead men don't cash money orders. Grady drove 6 hours into Bayou country and knocked on a houseboat door, and the man who opened it had scar tissue where his hands should have been, and eyes that had been waiting 9 years for someone to knock. Emile Fontenot had watched Jeb Barlow rig his boat, had gone aboard that night to pull his gear off, and had woken up in fire. He'd swum out under the dock, burned half to death, and the Barlows had found him in a Corpus Christi burn ward under a wrong name before the county ever did. They gave him a choice: stay dead for $800 a month, or be dead for free. "I got a granddaughter in Lafayette," Emile said. Staying dead seemed cheap. Grady put Willa's x-rays on the man's table. Emile looked at them a long time. Then he said, "Took you people 9 years to knock. What do you need?" Grady's answer brought in the last piece. A woman named Yolanda Cruz, an ATF-certified fire investigator in Houston, who had worked the Miss O'Deal as her first case, and had never been allowed to close it. A living victim changed everything. But federal cases move slow, Cruz warned him. Weeks. Grady nodded. The law could have the family. The brothers, though, the 4 sets of hands, those he was keeping for himself. 6 days, he told her. Keep your people close in 6 days. What happened over the next 6 nights, Copano Flats still argues about, because no camera saw it and no lock reported it. On the second night, Knox Barlow stayed late alone at the impound office, a building he considered a fortress. Chain link, floodlights, 2 Rottweilers, steel door. At dawn his yard man found the dogs asleep, the floodlights looping dead footage, moon steam, and Knox on the floor of his own locked office, with his right hand shattered and his eye socket cracked. The exact 2 injuries on Willa's chart in the exact order, spread neatly across his desk, were printouts of his own VIN racket, every swapped truck, every forged title, arranged like homework awaiting a grade. On top sat a single index card that said, in block letters, Boys Discipline. Knox told the deputies he'd fallen off a ladder. He hadn't seen anyone, he insisted, and the fear in his voice wasn't of the man who'd come through his steel door like weather, it was of the paperwork. He couldn't describe his attacker without explaining his desk. 2 nights later, Jeb Barlow was found at sunrise in the lazarette of the Corinda B, folded into the crawl space where Willa had found the rig. His hand and orbital broken to the same blueprint, the arson timer zip-tied to the pipe beside his head, with a fresh insurance form rolled up in his shirt pocket like a diploma. The rig had been photographed, tagged, and left exactly where the fire marshal, the real one, not the bought clerk, would be told to look. Jeb wept in the ambulance, and it was not from the pain. The wing at Bayview Regional began to fill up, 1 floor above the room where Willa was learning to move her fingers again. Rance Barlow hired protection, 2 off-duty deputies who owed him, and slept in the concrete records room of his bail office, a room with 1 door and no windows, which suited Grady fine, because a breacher's favorite room is the one the target thinks is safe. On the 5th morning, the deputies swore on their mothers that nobody had passed them. Rance was inside, hand and orbital, laid out on his own cot with his kickback ledger open on his chest, to the page bearing the judge's name, a yellow highlighter still resting in the crease like a bookmark. Deacon, the youngest, the one whose elbow had come down on a 17-year-old's face, didn't hide. He sat up nights in his gym under the ring lights with a bat across his knees and 2 fighters for company, and told anyone who'd listen what he'd do. On the 6th night, his 2 fighters went out for food and came back to find the doors chained from the inside, and Deacon in the center of the ring, hand, orbital, and the only man to get something extra, both elbows. Around him, arranged in a neat circle on the canvas, lay the gym's real books. 4 brothers, 1 hospital wing. The same wing as the girl. 6 days. Not one of them would say a word to investigators because every crime scene was made of their own crimes. The family's lawyer, a smooth Corpus Christi operator named Barrett Nix, who had papered over Barlow messes for a decade, drove up to manage the situation. The next morning, he found a folder on the seat of his own Mercedes inside his own locked garage inside his own gated house. It held copies of everything, and on top, the Miss O'Deal insurance filing with his signature on it, and a sticky note, "You're in the folder too." Barrett Nix filed his withdrawal from representation by 9 o'clock and was reportedly in Dallas by lunch. That was the day Tamsin stopped defending her family. She had spent a week telling herself her brothers had only scared the girl because the alternative was unbearable. Then Grady, without a word, laid Willa's phone photos and Dr. Kroll's Weissmark pictures side by side on the kitchen table and walked out of the room. When he came back, his wife was still staring at them, and she was done. "They want to sit down," she said quietly. "Mama's calling the whole family to the boatyard tomorrow night. She says it's to make peace." "Grady, it is not to make peace." He kissed the top of her head. "I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." They were waiting for him at the boatyard the next evening, and it was not a sit-down, it was a corral. 11 of them, Charlene's brothers, Orville's cousins, 2 nephews out of the same mold as Deacon, arranged in a loose horseshoe of pickups and bad intent. Pipe wrenches and pick handles held low, the way men hold things they're pretending not to hold. Grady rolled his truck slow into the middle of it and stopped. Charlene stepped forward under the dock lights with her purse over her arm like she was going to a hymn sing. "You touched our blood," one of the nephews shouted, and the horseshoe tightened. "You come into our town. You put 4 of our boys in the hospital. You think you drive out of here?" Charlene raised one hand, and the yard went quiet, and she looked at her son-in-law through the windshield with those flat church picnic eyes. "Last chance, soldier. Who do you think you are?" she said. Grady rolled down the window, then leaned back so they could see exactly who sat in his passenger seat. 9 years dead, Emile Fontenot sat there in the dome light, his scarred hands folded in his lap, looking at the entire Barlow family the way the tide looks at a sandcastle. "Evening, Charlene," he said. "You still owe me a boat." Nobody moved, nobody breathed. 11 people stood in that boatyard staring at a ghost, and every single one of them understood, in the same instant, exactly what his presence meant. The fire, the fraud, 9 years of hush money, all of it alive and sitting in a truck with its seatbelt buckled. And that was before the lights came on. Headlights, all at once, from the road, the fish house, and the pier. Federal sedans and Texas Rangers, because Agent Yolanda Cruz had asked Grady for a single favor: get every Barlow who signed the checks standing together in one place, on the property where the evidence was, on a night of their own choosing, so no lawyer could ever claim it was a setup. Grady hadn't walked into their trap. He had arranged it himself. The last words Charlene Barlow said as a ranger read her rights weren't aimed at the agents at all. They were aimed at the truck, at the man in the driver's seat who had never once raised his voice. "You said you'd do nothing," she spat. Grady shook his head and finally handed her back her own smirk. "No, ma'am," he said. "I said nothing. There's a difference." The federal case ran 14 months and never once faltered. Arson, mail fraud, insurance fraud, witness tampering, obstruction, and once Willa took the stand with her rebuilt hand resting on the rail, retaliation against an informant too. Emile Fontenot testified across 2 days in a courtroom so silent you could hear the court reporter breathing. And when the prosecutor read Charlene's own words from that hallway back to the jury, "Boys, discipline, what will you do? Call the army," you could watch 12 faces shut like storm shutters. The brothers, staring down their own charges, did exactly what men like that always do. They turned on one another, each racing to trade the rest for a shorter sentence. And the empire that had run the law in Capano Flats for 40 years came apart in a single season. Charlene received 11 years. The brothers got 8 to 15 apiece, sentences the town noted with quiet satisfaction, still wearing their casts. The impound contract went out to public bid. The bail office turned into a bait shop. Nobody was ever charged over the 6 nights, since no victim would speak, no camera had caught it, and the county, frankly, never looked too hard. As for the Renshaws, Tamsin reclaimed her own name for a while, not to leave her husband, but to bury her maiden one for good, and the marriage her family had spent 20 years squeezing finally found room to breathe. Willa's hand needed 3 surgeries and a year of therapy, and the first thing she built once her welding bead came back clean was a skiff, 22 feet long, every seam her own work. She painted the name on the transom herself, and they trailered it out to Dulac and set it in the water, while an old Cajun man stood on the dock crying into his scarred hands. "Fair trade," Emile said, for a knock on the door. "And if you drive through Capano Flats today, you'll pass a small fabrication shop with a new sign out front, one Willa redesigned during her year of therapy. It shows a door, and beneath the door, 6 words, Renshaw and daughter. We don't open, everything else does. So that's the story, and here's what stays with me. Everyone in that hallway assumed they knew what strength sounded like. Charlene thought it sounded like a smirk and a family name. The nephews thought it sounded like 11 engines revving in a boatyard. And most of us, if we're being honest, probably think it sounds like the yelling we'd have done ourselves with our daughter in surgery. But the strongest man in this entire story never once raised his voice. 19 years in the hardest job on earth taught Grady something the Barlows never managed to learn. Noise is what you make when you don't have a plan. Watch the quiet ones. The man who says nothing in the hallway isn't absorbing the insult. He's taking measurements. And here's the detail I love most. His real revenge was never the 6 nights. It was a knock on a houseboat door in Louisiana. The Barlows' entire kingdom rested on one buried lie, and instead of swinging at the walls, Grady found the hinge, a dead man who wasn't actually dead, and the whole structure came off in his hand. That's the real lesson here, and it applies to problems that have nothing to do with a locked door at all. Stop hammering at the part that's built to withstand hammering. Study the thing, find what it's hiding. Every fortress you're afraid of is holding its breath about something. If this one hit you, do me a favor, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done standing in that hallway. Because I've read your comments before, and some of you genuinely scare me. See you in the next one.